Let's get peppy. Here is where you go to find out what wasn't on the show. It sounds better every single week, Dave. That slogan, I'm loving it. I am Chaz Ciadello, the co-host, the shorter, squeakier, raspier host of Planet America, which is on ABC TV, and you can see it on iView or YouTube. And here is the man who I think of as the king of the stats and the king of the cats, Dr. Dave Smith. Hey, Dave.
Hi, Chaz. How many peppers do you think know about Lloyd Benson's storied political career?
We have a very intelligent audience, Dave, despite the fact that they watch us. So I would say a lot.
I know very little about Lloyd Benson, other than he was the one who came up with the "You're no Jack Kennedy" line.
Yes,
at Dan Quayle.
Yeah.
Dan Quayle, who we now know played a critical role in the certification of the 2020 presidential election.
Yeah, he is, of course, the person that Mike Pence consulted when Mike Pence was looking for someone other than Donald Trump to say to him, you can do this. You can actually do this thing that Donald Trump's asking you to do. And he found no one. So he thought, I'll go to this.
He turns to the one other vice president from Indiana.
Well,
Mike,
I'm thinking it's less that he was from Indiana. I'm thinking it's more they thought, who was the stupidest vice president in history that I can turn to because they might say yes. But no, even he said no.
Yeah, for the peppers unfamiliar with Dan Quayle's career, he was famous for telling a very confused 10-year-old at a spelling bee that the word potato had an E on it, and also for suggesting that humans might be able to breathe on Mars.
Yes.
But even he said that Mike Pence wouldn't have the constitutional authority to overturn the 2020 election.
Yes. By the way, welcome to episode 87. I'm going to do something a little bit different this time. I'm going to start by just detailing a couple of... We covered a lot of material on the show on Planet America today. I don't like to double up too much with the podcast because there's a certain amount of overlap there. But what I am going to do is I'm just going to name check a couple of the topics that we talked about that we're not going to go into too much detail here, but just add one or two little things. And if you have anything to say about them, Dave, jump in. But these are not full topics. We're not going to spend a long time on them. First of all, I just want to name check the Durham investigation, which we talked a little bit about. They indicted a guy called Igor Danchenko this week. I talked a couple of weeks ago about Sussman. Danchenko, that was another one of their indictments. Danchenko was the main source for Christopher Steele in the Steele dossier. You might recall that the Horowitz report made a real mess of the Steele dossier about a year ago. They said that most of it came from this Danchenko guy, and he just threw all the report under the bus. He said, there's rumours and gossip and there's stuff I heard in the pub. Like he set a very low bar for the information in the Steele dossier in the Horowitz report. But he hasn't even cleared that bar at this point in time because Danchenko was just indicted for lying to the FBI about who his sources were. So he didn't even meet the pub test, which he set for himself a year ago. There's a lot of interest in one guy in particular, a guy called Charles Dolan Jr., who was a PR exec and the state chair for Clinton's 92 and 96 campaigns. The suggestion was this Dolan guy told Danchenko that he had Russian sources, but he just fed Danchenko any old bullshit that he just found on the internet. And Danchenko then passed that on to Steele as a Russian source. And no one was Russian in this process. So just to summarise where we're at, there's a bit more to it than that, but just to summarise essentially this story, because I don't want to go into it in too much detail. When Steele put together the dossier, he was getting paid by Fusion, who were being paid by Democrats. Steele's primary source was Danchenko, who was getting info from one ex-Russian who turns out to be a massive Hillary Clinton fan. Like they gave this guy, as a present, a Hillary Clinton book, right? And Danchenko, and then there's a Dolan guy who was a Clinton ally and was making shit up. Those are Danchenko's two main sources. And then Steele would then put all this stuff in his dossier and act like it came from the finest of spycraft. And then you've also got Sussman, who's feeding info to the FBI, who was also being paid by Clinton. So we knew the dossier was kind of garbage, but there's a real Clinton flavour to this dossier that we didn't know until now. So that's the story. Do you have anything to add to that, or...?
This whole saga reminds me of a movie franchise that produces big budget disappointment after big budget disappointment, but for reasons unknown still has a hardcore devoted fan base that demands prequels and prequels to prequels and endless reboots. That's all I'm going to say about this.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Like, I do feel like, especially in regards to this particular new bit of information, that we've established that the Steele dossier was crap. Like, we know that. We knew that long...
We've known for a very long time.
That's what I'm saying. That's what, in fact, I knew the day it came out. I remember being told by some of the people sitting next to me going, oh my God, this is amazing. I was just reading it going, there's no way this is true.
No. It was too lurid and funny to be true. I mean, the thing that immediately set it off in my mind is anything that you want to be this true, it's not true, right? Anything that seems so deliberately tailored to the most lurid fantasies of people who don't like Trump, it's not going to be true. So and the political purpose of banging on about this is just to try to keep it alive for as long as possible. Yeah,
we should say, like I have to say every time I mention this, because what people want is for you to therefore conclude that the entire Russiagate thing was invented by Hillary Clinton. Yeah. That is what they're trying to get to. But remember, the FBI was all over Trump and Russia long before Steele dossier came along and anything Clinton related. So we should just say that. Anyway, enough about that.
Yeah, also a periodic reminder that Barr very cleverly kind of publicly played the Mueller report in a way that now in public memory it's remembered as something that exonerated Trump rather than actually damning him pretty significantly, which is what it actually did.
That is also true.
Yes.
Let's move on to the economy. We talked a lot about on the show. Once again, I'll just give you quick highlights and then we can move on. Unemployment was great last month. 531,000 jobs were added, down the unemployment rate down to 4.6% from 4.8%. And also, what isn't covered so much is the 235,000 extra jobs that were added to the previous 2 months in revisions, which is very unusual, that many jobs being added in revisions. So they became 366,000 jobs in 1 month and 483,000 jobs in another month. So they sound pretty good, those figures. Workers were sitting on a pile of cash, $2.3 trillion more in savings than they had before the pandemic, as of very recently. The median household's checking account balance is 50% higher in July of this year than it was in 2019. These are all good numbers, but the number which everyone's talking about is the inflation number. They're not talking about those numbers. In October, inflation was 6.2% for the previous year, 0.9% just in the previous month. That number's the key number, the 0.9%, because I think we all got, everyone got that when the economy was going to turn back on, there was going to be inflation because there was going to be supply shocks. But it's one thing for there to be a one-time jump up and then you just maintain that jump up. And another thing for it to keep on jumping. And the 0.9% in the last month was the issue because it got up to 0.9% about 4 months ago and it came back down to 0.3, 0.4% per month. And people were thinking, okay, so we're over the hill now and it's going to start to come back down to normal. But now it went back up to 0.9% for the previous month. So that's what's got the red sirens flashing on that one. The core inflation's not much better, 4.2% for the year. That's inflation stripped out with just the basics. Energy inflation is between 40 and 50%, depending on the product you're talking about. Going into winter, when people use more energy. That's a critical issue there. The winter months account for between 50 and 80% of your residential fuel consumption, depending on where you live. Obviously, the colder it is, the more you use. Natural gas is the worst of all. They've basically doubled prices in the last year. And natural gas is used to heat about half of US households. So this is going to become a very big issue, I suspect, over the next 2 or 3 months, if it's not already. Also, a big problem from my perspective, real wages are starting to go down now. Until now, real wages have been keeping up with inflation as it's been going up. But as of this month, real average hourly wages fell 1.2% over the last year. Real average weekly wages fell 1.6%. Some of those wages will be above inflation because there's some big wage hikes going on at the moment. But obviously a lot of them won't have kept up with inflation, and 13% of workers have received no change in paycheck over the last year. So they would be super screwed over as a result of this kind of inflation. Obviously, retirees receive pensions not adjusted for inflation as well. And this is all probably feeding into why, as of October, according to Morning Consult, 62% held the Biden administration responsible for inflation with all the spending, etc. Even though I think that's a bit overblown a little bit, because a lot of this spending is over 10 years. Like if we're talking about, for instance, the big reconciliation bill that's coming up now, Joe Manchin's making sounds about, inflation's going to be an issue there. They're spending it over 10 years. So it's actually not that much. But anyway, let's leave that aside for now. 68% said they thought economic conditions were getting worse, undoubtedly because of inflation. That's from Gallup. Fewer said it was getting better in October, then said it was getting better in April 2009.
Yes,
in the middle of the GFC. And these aren't just partisans, because even Democrats, according to the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Survey, are have the same consumer sentiment as they did in the very early 2010s when they were just coming out of the recession. So it is an issue, I think, for Biden. The good news, though, is let's not forget the Dow. Do you remember how Trump couldn't shut up about the Dow in 2017, 2018? Just out of curiosity, I had a look at the Dow. It's going great guns. I'm not expecting the Trump supporters to therefore change their mind about Biden and celebrate the Dow now, but I'll just note that. Anyway, do you have any thoughts about any of this, Dave? Inflation or any of this stuff?
Yeah, I've got quite a lot of thoughts. Just first of all, on inflation itself, and it is playing this really outsized role in the way that people estimate how the economy is going. Now, part of that is because inflation is very visible to everyone, especially in petrol prices. Okay, so a lot of this concern about inflation is particularly acute because of what's happening with petrol prices, a lot of which is to do with, with global markets. And fair enough, and fuel prices in general, yes, you can see going into winter why people are concerned about that. But the other thing is that media coverage has been obsessive about inflation, which is because it's been so long since there's actually been significant inflation in the United States, which is related to the fact that it's been so long since there's been significant wage growth. We have forgotten what it's like when inflation actually happens, and the extent that the media gets into a real panic about it. And this is where you see a kind of area of economic orthodoxy, which hasn't always been visible over the last 10 years because the economy, it hasn't been producing a lot of inflation, but there's this real anti-inflation kind of orthodoxy. Now, there are certainly, obviously, bad aspects to inflation, especially when as you say, if real wages aren't rising in conjunction with it. But there's another side to this as well, which is inflation can benefit people who are in debt. The people who are most upset about inflation are the creditor class, okay? And this is very reflected in media coverage. It's reflected in this level of panic around it. It's not just because people are having to spend more on milk. It's because the people who actually own the media get really upset when inflation starts to happen. Now, it's often forgotten that one of the biggest economic conflicts in the United States after the Civil War was over whether inflation should happen in a very conscious way. It was over whether the monetary supply should essentially be expanded by adding silver along with gold into the metal that could be used in currency. This was a huge political conflict in the US, and the battle lines were basically drawn between creditors and debtors. So especially indebted farmers were all in favour of expanding the monetary supply in a way that would create inflation that would wipe out large amounts of debt. The movie The Wizard of Oz is actually about this populist struggle, or the book was an allegory for this popular struggle. Some bits of it got carried on into the movie, but the, Scarecrow representing farmers who get themselves into debt, the Tin Man representing the industrial proletariat that can't stand up to the workers, the Cowardly Lion representing completely hollowed out governmental institutions that couldn't stand up to major interests, and then the Wizard of Oz representing the entire hollow power structure itself.
Well, as a 6-year-old, I did not pick that, I have to say.
No. By the way, if you're interested in a sort of broader perspective on the issue of debt, David Graeber's book, which is now a 10-year-old classic, very highly controversial, Debt, the First 5,000 Years, is very good on this stuff. I'm just pointing out that yes, there are bad aspects to inflation that people feel, but the kind of level of discourse that you see about inflation is this absolute evil that needs to be avoided. You have to remember that reflects the economic interests of the ruling class, basically of the creditor class, who don't want billions of dollars being wiped off debt overnight by inflation, which is essentially what it does, right? Because the amount that's owed stays the same, but essentially the value of what is owed goes down. Now, the second thing that I want to mention is there's a really important event coming up which is related to this, which is Biden choosing a chair of the Federal Reserve. Biden's choice of a chair of the Federal Reserve is going to be one of the most consequential choices that he makes in terms of appointments. I think it's one of the most consequential choices that any president can actually make. And the reason is that this appointee has way more independence than any other appointee that the president chooses, with the exception of Supreme Court justices, right? So most cabinet members these days, with the way that power has been centralised in the White House over most issues, it's not hugely consequential who the choice of cabinet secretary is. To look at foreign policy as an example, it's very clear that the US foreign policy is Biden's foreign policy. Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, at this point, both fine gentlemen, both essentially just spokespeople for Biden rather than people who are initiating policy. Yeah. Okay, Attorney General, yes, that's another position where there's sort of more independence going on, and certainly the Justice Department at the moment isn't blindly doing the bidding of the Biden administration. If they were, they certainly would not have, let the stuff about potentially paying asylum seekers $450,000 get out. But chair of the Fed, that is a genuinely independent position, right? Yeah. So Trump was constantly angry with Jerome Powell because of the fact that he would actually consider raising interest rates, which, by the way, would have completely fucked all of Trump's businesses. So, they are independent. And I want to cite something academically here, which is a paper written by the chair of my dissertation committee, Bill Clark, and another student of his, Vincent R.L. Bundock, about the Federal Reserve, which says that it's politically independent, but it's not politically indifferent, okay? The Federal Reserve does have its own kind of political orthodoxy that it follows, and the Federal Reserve, if we're going to be completely honest about it, would usually prefer to see Republican administrations, because Republican economic orthodoxy tends to be more in line with Federal Reserve economic policy. Now, that may have changed a little bit with Trump because of the weird directions that Trump has taken the GOP in, but they show in this paper that over a 50-year period, you tend to see the Federal Reserve loosening and tightening monetary policy in line with election cycles that tend to benefit the Republican Party. So what I'm saying is Democrats can never expect an easy ride from the Federal Reserve. Okay, the Federal Reserve is always going to pursue tighter monetary policies with Democrats because they don't trust Democrats.
Well, on that note, the question I was about to ask was, if we look at the current situation, obviously what you're saying is correct about the importance of the Fed Reserve chair, But if we look at
Yeah.
the actual decision, whether to retain Powell or get someone new,
Yeah.
Powell has been, I think, considered quite patient when it comes to inflation.
Yes, he has been.
So is the choice really that big a choice in terms of the variety of reactions that Biden might get, given that he's not going to go the other way? He's either going to get someone who's more patient than Powell or Powell.
Yeah, well, this is a really big question. So the other main person who's being cited as a candidate is Lael Brainerd, who's much more closely tied to the Democratic Party, who's a governor of the Federal Reserve, and who, I mean, she's being painted by her opponents as a candidate of the left, but she's not really. No. Yeah. More probably is going to be more patient with things like inflation and interest rates than Powell, but not full blown left. And I found it was interesting that Betsy Stevenson, who was one of Obama's economic advisors, University of Michigan economist, she said she thinks that Powell should stay in the role. She thinks it would be counterproductive to change hands at the moment. She said she thinks Powell's done a very good job, and she thinks what Powell is aiming for is full employment on the other side of the pandemic, which is a traditionally very democratic aim, as opposed to being really hawkish about inflation and using interest rates as a tool for that. So, yeah, it's not entirely clear, even though I think in general terms it is an extremely consequential choice. It's not entirely clear what the difference would be between them. And I think it's probably for this reason that Biden appears to be leaning towards Powell. Right. It's hard to say, but this is Washington Post had a big report today about why it might be Brainerd, but CNN's reporting that he is leaning towards Powell.
He's got a few seats to fill as well, doesn't he? He's got 3 or 4 coming out.
Yeah. This is this sort of unexpected area in which Biden has a rare opportunity to kind of overhaul an institute, a very important independent institution a bit in terms of who he appoints. But I don't think that he's going to stack it with lefties. It's the Federal Reserve will continue to be the same institution that it has been. And Democrats obviously really valued the independence of the Federal Reserve during the Trump administration. Chances are it will stay, very independent, perhaps slightly more Democratic leaning, but probably pretty much the same.
I was just thinking, there is one that when you say that the people who care about inflation are the capital class, there is actually another group of people who I think should be worried about inflation, and that is people who are concerned about climate change. Because I feel like, as you say, it doesn't have to be tied to petrol prices, but it often is.
Yes.
I mean, I understand the irony of what I'm about to say, which is what I was about to say is that when petrol prices are going up, people want more petrol. They go, okay, let's do more drilling. Drill, baby, drill. Come on, let's go. And it's a terrible time for being environmentally friendly. Now, I understand the irony of that is, well, the easy way to get off that cycle is to use renewable energy. Like if petrol prices are going through the roof, then that should encourage solar power and wind power. But that, unfortunately, is not how it works. In the real world, how it works is people become super conservative when they're worried about their wallet, and they just want to do the least imaginative thing possible. And I feel like at this point in time, we've got, I don't know, not that much time to deal with emissions. It's unfortunate if part of that period is going to be taken up by massive fear about petrol prices, because that's going to be not very conducive to dealing with the situation. But anyway, do you have anything else to say about inflation before we move on?
Well, one final addendum. I said, inflation can be very good for people in debt.
Yeah.
However, the response to inflation can be very bad for people in debt, which is if interest rates get raised, people who are on particularly precarious loans or people who have large, variable home loans, people who are highly leveraged, especially in the property market, they can really suffer from that kind of response, which, as I said, is one of the reasons why Trump did not want interest rates raised at all, no matter how well the economy was going during his presidency. He insisted on interest rates going down because he was just leveraged to the hilt. So it's not, the response can be very bad for people in debt.
Yeah, and also countries in debt, which is relevant to the country we're talking about.
But we've talked about this before. The US debt is different. This is the old, if you owe the bank $1 million, the bank owns you. If you owe the bank $1 trillion, you own the bank, right? US debt is the whole world's problem. No one's ever going to collect on it.
Oh no, I know. I don't. I'm not suggesting that someone's going to send debt collectors to the White House and start repossessing the furniture. But just in terms of like a slice of the budget each year, the interest rate payments being slightly greater than they otherwise would be. But that is also going to keep interest rates down because of that reason. But
anyway, read David Graeber on debt. Very controversial, but well worth looking at.
This is debt the first 5,000 years?
Debt the first 5,000 years.
It's in the book list as of right this moment. Right. Just moving on slightly to the follow-ups. There is a follow-up I wanted to do, which is related to this, which is about the supply shock, which we've talked about a few times. There's something that people have been throwing around a bit this week, which I just wanted to respond to, which is there's been a lot of talk this week about truckies and about truckies being if not the major issue, a major issue, because there's supposedly a shortage of 80,000 truckies. I just wanted to address that. I've been making Plain America on and off for 9 years now, and there has never been a time in that 9-year period that I haven't read articles about there being somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000 truckies short in America. That entire time, people have been going, oh, truckies, never enough truckies, never enough truckies. Oh, it's such an issue, truckies. So actually 80,000 trucker shortfall is normal by the standards of the last 9 years. For all I know, they've been saying it since trucks existed. I got no idea. But I don't believe it. I don't believe it because I've just been reading this forever. What I think is probably more likely to be the situation is that, okay, by the way, before I say this, if there was a shortfall, if I was wrong, they'd probably pay truckies more. Because if you look at the pay of truckies, it's been going down relative to everyone else. I'm talking relative to blue-collar workers here, not Wall Street operators. In 1995, truckies earned about 44% more than the median blue-collar worker. Today, they only earn 23% more. So their wages are going down relative to the median blue-collar worker. So they'd probably pay them more if there was a shortage. What I think is the real problem is this. I read an article about this week. It rang true to me. That they're staying away from, to the extent that there is a shortage, they're staying away from the ports. Why are they staying away from the ports? Well, port drivers are independent contractors and they get paid per load. When the ports are congested, it takes a lot longer to go through loads. If you would normally go through 3 loads a day, you only go through 1 load a day now. So all of a sudden you got a 2/3 pay cut. But you still have to sit there waiting in the queue for your load for the 12 hours a day or wherever you're going to work anyway. You're just not driving. You're just sitting there like you're an 80s movie stakeout, just eating burgers while you're waiting for your load, and you're getting paid 1/3 as much. So if there is a truckie shortage, I would suggest that's probably the reason why. Okay. I don't think it's total truckies that's the issue.
Since you've mentioned truckies and 80s movies, can we talk briefly about trucking movies?
Please.
Okay. The best ever trucking movie was from 1953. It's actually a French movie, but it's centered around a fictional American company. It's called The Wages of Fear.
The Wages of Fear?
It's about 2 truck drivers taking this highly, highly volatile load over a mountain. And it is just the most tense thing you will ever see. Like you'll be clinging to the edge of your couch the entire time. Okay. Second best trucking movie of all time is the noir classic They Drive by Night, featuring Humphrey Bogart and Ida Lupino. I regret to say the quality really drops off from that point, right?
Every Which Way But Loose, number 3.
No. Convoy is number 3.
Okay.
The Chris Christopherson vehicle with Sam Peckinpah, it's ridiculous. It's completely absurd, but it does feature the song Convoy.
Yes.
Anyway, it's ridiculous. Like at one point, there's this evil sheriff character who says, "I hate truckers," and by that point of the movie, you're like, "Yeah, I fucking agree with you." Yeah. Then Every Which Way But Loose is 4th.
Woo!
I believe that the critical consensus around that was that the chimp was a better actor than Clint Eastwood.
Orangutan, have some respect.
The orangutan was a better actor than Clint Eastwood in the movie. But dead last is the Sylvester Stallone truck driving arm wrestling movie Over the Top.
I haven't seen this. It sounds like I should.
Over the Top has, I last saw it when I was a teenager, so I don't know, but I doubt that it would have actually improved.
I can't. I can't believe that I have something to add to this conversation, but I actually do.
Yes.
The first thing is I've got a question for you. This is like the Die Hard Christmas movie question. Yeah. Do the Transformers franchise count as trucking movies?
Oh,
there's a lot of trucks.
I haven't seen any of them, so I can't comment on them.
They would all be equal last if they do count as trucking movies. The second thing I would say is we're going to lose some listeners because of this, but I have a story to tell, which is when I was young. I was about 12, right? So maybe times have changed. Maybe if I went back and looked at it, this highly respected movie, I would have a different view now. But when I was 12, I was visiting my uncle, and he said, and he said, "Do you want to watch a movie?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, I got a great movie for you here. This is Steven Spielberg's first movie, Duel."
Oh, Duel!
Yeah, and I go, Steven Spielberg? Oh, yeah, I'll watch that, absolutely. And they put it on, the whole time I thought it was a prank. I thought, my uncle, it was a bit of a jokester. And I thought, this is a prank. There's no way Steven Spielberg made this fucking hunk of shit. This is the worst movie ever.
I actually really like Duel. I'd forgotten about it.
Lots of people like Duel. It is actually a classic movie. I haven't watched it since I was 12, so I can't reevaluate as yet.
I would have had it at 3rd. I would have had it ahead of Convoy.
Yeah. But let me tell you, the whole time I was just sure he was taking the piss, because I was just going, there is no way that this is a real movie that people like. He knows that he's picked the worst movie he can find. I just hated it so much. I will try and reevaluate it at some point in time, because I know there are going to be very angry comments. Because a lot of people love Duel, but man, did I hate that movie when I saw it. I wanted an orangutan. That's what I wanted. Where's the orangutan, I asked. Anyway.
How can you have a truck driving movie without an orangutan?
Anyway, let's probably move on from the trucking movies.
Okay.
The Build Back, no, not the Build Back, the infrastructure bill passed this week. That's a pretty big topic. We did cover it. I did spend 8 minutes talking about what was in it. In the show, though, so I'm going to move past it quickly unless you have things to say about it, Dave. The one thing I would say about the content of the infrastructure bill is that I don't think we've talked enough about the lead pipes, because if 5 years ago there was constant coverage about how big a problem lead pipes were in America.
Absolutely.
And it was leading to higher crime rates. It was leading to literally thousands of dollars per person in lower productivity, because it gives you brain damage, an entire generation. And it creates inequality, because it's mostly the poor areas that have the lead pipes. And it literally affects your brain. In this bill, they reckon they're going to get rid of every single lead pipe. Now, I don't know if they're actually going to follow through on that. It's the kind of promise that you hear about, and then you hear someone else make that promise 10 years later. But if that's true, that is worth the $1.2 trillion by itself.
Yes,
That's a huge, huge thing if that's true.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
No, that would be a really significant public health intervention, and it is I kind of feel it's one of these things that had it been proposed 10 years ago, it would have faced this enormous backlash of, too expensive, too unrealistic. Lead pipe was fine when I was growing up with it. But I think there has been a real shift in political possibility since then. So I hope that they do follow through on this.
Do you, off the top of your head, have any particular bits of that bill that you find interesting that you want to mention one way or another?
No, not particularly, especially if you talked about it for
8 minutes.
For 8 minutes.
8 minutes, that's fine. Okay, that's all right. All I want to say, just a couple of quick things I didn't get in the show. We need to emphasise, this is not, like, Biden is talking about it like it's a stimulus bill. It's not going to help the economy, especially not straight away. Like it is, I mean, look, in the long run, yeah, it will, infrastructure is good for the economy, obviously. It increases the productive capacity of the economy.
Yes.
But it's not. There'll be no miracles. There'll be no obvious. Whoa! Here's the sugar rush from the infrastructure bill. It's not going to work like that. It's going to take years to implement most of this spending, and if they do it right, it's going to be quite hidden, the benefits. But they will be there. They will be there if you do it right. But just, I don't think we should oversell it. I don't think that's wise.
We've talked before about it's the Democratic Party's specialty to be able to hide the benefits of everything that they actually do.
That is true. Another thing, actually, by the way, I know I mentioned climate change before. One of the things that doesn't get covered so much, but is a real issue if you're worried about carbon emissions in America, is the going offline of nuclear power, which is happening quite rapidly in a lot of parts of America because they built a lot of nuclear power stations 30, 40 years ago and haven't built many since. And they have a life cycle of about 30 or 40 years. So, and this bill is going to keep a bunch of them online, which is useful because that's solar power and wind power that doesn't need to be built to replace them. Sorry, what were you about to say, Dave?
Yes. Yeah, no, it's funny. When I think about the age of nuclear power plants, it's, because the first wave of nuclear power plants in the US, I think, was built in the 50s. Because I always think about, the early Simpsons episodes are portraying nuclear infrastructure that is so old that it's, really decayed even by then. But that is a very good point about keeping the nuclear power plants online. I mean, we haven't really ever got much into nuclear policy on this show, but I think that's a very good part.
We didn't. I don't know if you have anything to say about the deal that Congress did to try and break the deadlock that had formed, where you had basically the progressives agreed to give up their leverage. Like until now, they've had this leverage of you're not getting the infrastructure bill unless we get the Build Back Better, and they agreed to let that go, to let the hostage go, as long as in return for the moderates saying, well, we promise to, if the CBO matches the numbers we're seeing, we promise to pass it. If the CBO doesn't match the numbers we're seeing, we promise to fix that as soon as possible and then pass it.
Yeah.
That sounds very nice. In reality, the hold-up has never been the House moderates. It's always been Joe Manchin and Kirsten
Absolutely, yes.
And they made no promises. So the progressives did, I think, probably knowingly give up their hand. And I think to be honest, it's not because they're great guys. I think they realised they actually had no leverage. I think they realised that Manchin literally does not give a shit about whether the bipartisan bill passes or not. So
and I also think that, as we talked about last week, the Virginia and New Jersey elections are a pretty clear indicator they will not have a majority as of December next year. So they've just got to get this stuff done. A lot's been made of the 6 who voted against it.
Yep.
It is worth noticing. It's worth noting. You often see this in the case of legislation where it's known that it's got the numbers to go through, is that it's considered politically useful to allow people to vote against it. So that was very carefully managed. Those 6 votes all came towards the end when it was clear that it was going to pass. That was an important outlet for progressives to indicate their dissatisfaction with the situation. But yeah, they weren't trying to sabotage it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say exactly the same thing. It was the six squad, the new squad, which is the four original squad plus Bowman and Bush. Yes, and I was going to say the same thing. If they needed those votes, I'm sure they would have gotten those votes, but they didn't need those votes. And that also cuts both ways. It cuts with the Republicans as well, because the Republicans are copying a lot of grief from other Republicans saying, you passed this bill for Joe Biden. It wouldn't have got up without you. Bullshit. It would have got up without them.
Absolutely.
So I feel like that the ins and outs of the actual vote have been hyped way beyond what they should be. Like it was going to get up. The only other thing I'd say is that it's funny that the condition of the Build Back Better bill is that it be deficit neutral, when the infrastructure bill is not deficit neutral. The CBO gave that a score of $256 billion deficit, and that was a serious underselling. Like the CRFB, the Committee for Responsible Financial Budgeting, I don't know what it stands for. The CRFB, they were looking at the CBO's numbers and were saying, really, looking at their numbers, it's more like a $450 billion deficit, this bill, not a $256 billion deficit. Yet no one cares about that. Joe Manchin doesn't care about that one, which is kind of funny. Do you have anything to say about any of the Congress stuff, Build Back Better bill or bipartisan bill at all? Or is that?
No.
Yeah, okay, all right.
That's it.
All right, that's fine. I'd like to... actually, I will say one thing about the Build Back Better bill. I went in some detail. This is a follow-up. Last week on Chaz Unleashed, I talked way more than anyone should ever talk about taxes. But that's what I do when I'm unleashed. I talk about taxes, Dave. One I missed from the Build Back Better bill, which I think is worth noting, is it's because it's going to gain no attention, is that they're leaving tobacco taxes untouched, but they're putting a nicotine tax on non-tobacco products. So
vaping.
So vaping and nicotine patches, nicotine gum, nicotine lozenges, all that stuff they're putting a tax on. And it's matching the tobacco tax, I think. But then you have state taxes on top of the federal taxes, so it goes up by even more. Basically, they're incentivizing people to not quit smoking, essentially, which is an interesting decision to make. Okay, it hasn't got much coverage, but I just flag it. That's just hidden there. I'll leave that now. Another follow-up. I talked once again in the COVID and the Chaz Unleashed about what I think it's called Molnupiravir, the Merck anti-COVID pill.
I was going to say, this has got to be a drug.
Yes. That's the Merck COVID pill. And what I said, Dave, and I'm setting this up for what I'm about to say, was I brought it up as saying this is a pill that works. It's got like a 50% effective rate, and it's very cheap and very easy to take. You take it home. You just take it straight away as soon as you get symptoms, and it helps you out with COVID. That's great. I said that this is the kind of thing that Joe Biden should be doing Operation Warp Speed for, pumping out heaps of these. They should have been pumping them out months ago, as far as I'm concerned, just like they did with the vaccines, so that when they're approved, then there's all these on the market, and you don't have to wait the 6 months for them to build up their provisions. Yeah. Well, there's another one. There's a Pfizer pill out this week, which is way better than Molnupiravir. It's called Paxlovid. That's not nearly unpronounceable enough. It can't work. But apparently in its trial, it's 89% effective in its trial. And its trial was only immunocompromised people as well.
Wow.
So that's a good result, 89% effective for immunocompromised people. And it's just as effective even if you wait 5 days after symptoms show themselves. So this is a good pill. But they're only cranking out 180,000 pill packs by the end of the year, which is 2 days of COVID in America. 180,000. And they're aiming for 21 million packs in the first 6 months of next year, but that's too late. Once again, this is what they should have an Operation Warp Speed for. Like we've debated this in the past where I said, give the Trump administration credit for Operation Warp Speed, and you made the the point which a lot of people have made, which is to say it wasn't exactly splitting the atom. It was kind of obvious to try and get the vaccines paid. But they could have done it for this, and they didn't. So, so this is something that they should have done Operation Warp Speed for, in my view.
I wonder, would vaccine-hesitant people take this medication?
Oh, I mentioned this on the show. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I've got better than this. I've got better than that, Dave. I wasn't going to talk about this because I was doubling up on the show, but I'll just do this very briefly for you. You know, what's it called? The antibody treatment, Regeneron. Regeneron can be used as a vaccine. It lasts for 7 months.
Wow.
So all these anti-vaxxers who go, oh, I don't need a vaccine, I can just use Regeneron. Oh, like the DeSantis crew going, oh yeah, the Regeneron, yeah, it's the best ever. Well, why don't you take your Regeneron then as a vaccine? Here we go. I'd love to see if they're going to do it.
I think that, okay, so my feeling about this is that the Paxlovids and other unpronounceables will actually have a higher uptake rate than the vaccine. Because for a lot of vaccine-hesitant people, it's vaccination itself is the thing that they don't like, although there are others for whom it's the whole medicine industrial complex that they don't like, so they would probably stay away from that as well. And then obviously in this context, there's this highly political component of conservatives who are really distrustful of basically any anti-pandemic measure, and they would probably not trust this either. So you probably will still have a situation of people who actually need to take this stuff not taking it and instead opting for the ivermectin and I have blessedly forgotten the name of that thing that was so big.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Oh, Jesus.
Sorry, mate.
Yeah.
Next follow-up, there's lots of bits and pieces in this podcast today. It's good, lots of variety. I want to follow up on Virginia with one point which leads to another point, which is, now we've heard a lot in the last few months about whether mail-in voting and early voting help Democrats, whether it's Democrats cheating, trying to steal elections and etc. Like all these so-called voting rights is really about stealing the election. Okay, we just saw for ourselves a real-life experiment in Virginia. And I can't believe I didn't think of this until I read someone else make this point this week, because it's a great point. The Democrats have been running up the scoreboard in Virginia for the last decade, okay? They've been doing really well in Virginia. And as a result of that, they had unified power in Virginia in the last few years. What did they do with that unified power? Let me tell you what they did, Dr. Dave. They got rid of their voter ID law completely. They added no excuse mail-in voting with ballots automatically sent to you, if you like, in perpetuity. They added 45 days of early voting. They made Election Day a state holiday. They've made automatic registration in Virginia. They've re-enfranchised 284,000 felons. This is the nightmare scenario for the voting rights brigade, for the voter fraud brigade. What was the result of all those changes? They swept the election. They won every single position and the Virginia House of Delegates. They won the lot. Easy voting, yes, it helps disadvantaged people, which some people see as code for black people or Hispanics, but it's also rural people and old people and people who vote for Republicans.
Yes.
Virginia proves that all this making voting easier equals fraud. Democrats will never lose another election. It proves it's bullshit.
It does. Yeah. And that will have no impact whatsoever on the voter fraud crew. Because, if Republicans were being realistic about this, they've actually got nothing to fear from high turnout elections. I thought even the 2020 election demonstrated that in terms of the obviously Republicans lost overall, but the gains that they did make in that election were in very high turnout context. But, of course, that is not the point. The point is casting doubt on the system, because that's what a certain segment of their support base really likes.
Yeah. And by the way, as a little aside, Did you hear the story about Youngkin's son?
No.
His son is 17 and he tried to vote in Virginia, all right? and the person on the booth, the volunteer, said, you can't vote. You're 17. You can vote in the primary if you turn 18 before the election, but you can't vote in an election when you're 17. And he was pretty upset about that. He went away, then came back and said, I've just talked to a friend. You can definitely vote when you're 17. I said, no, you can't. You cannot vote when you're 17, and sent him away. Now, in Virginia, that's okay, especially the new voter fraud-friendly Virginia, that's okay. But if they had red state laws, he's going to jail. If he's in Texas, he's tried to vote illegally, and he's going to jail. In Texas, there is a woman called Crystal Mason who is currently serving 5 years jail because she voted provisionally when she was on parole, and she didn't realise that you're not allowed to vote until your parole period is over. And she's in jail for 5 years because of that. And even trying to vote illegally in Texas is prison time. So,
very good point.
So once again, Youngkin's son is lucky that he lives in Blue Stateville.
Very, very lucky. And that they abolished the death penalty as well, because, you know, that's what Republicans would give people.
That's right. He definitely would have got a death penalty. And then just as a little aside on what we're talking about voting rights, North Carolina just passed their electoral map. I'm not sure if you saw that. The news came out just when when Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So a lot of people didn't notice. It's a 50-50 state, North Carolina. The GOP is going to win at least 10 House seats out of 14 after it's been thoroughly gerrymandered. The median congressional district in North Carolina is now 11.4 points redder than the state as a whole. So Democrats have to win North Carolina by 12 points just to break even. It's been so thoroughly gerrymandered. And of course, you might think to yourself, hang on, don't they have a Democrat governor? Why is he letting that happen? See, that's interesting you bring that up, hypothetical person I just made up. It just so happens that when the Republicans controlled North Carolina, after they lost the governor's race, they in the interregnum, they had the
lame duck period.
Yeah, the lame duck period. They just passed a whole bunch of laws taking away powers from the governor, including the power to veto an electoral map. So he had no say in that. And just before we leave Virginia, I think, given that the set's falling apart, I think given that we opened the door on the woke issue last week, Dave, I've never really talked about that. I've never really gone into much detail, but I'll do it next week because Thanksgiving's next week, so we're going to have less to talk about. so I'll give you my thoughts on that. You might be sick next week after you've heard that I'm going to talk about wokeness. But the only reason I tease that is just because, number one, it's going to give us hundreds of thousands of views without any doubt next week, because people are going to be queuing up to hear about that. But also, I believe
you give it a title like Chaz Destroys Wokeness.
Sounds good to me. I'm going to have to get a sting recorder for it. I believe you got good news for us, though, on wokeness, Dave. For people who want formal training in anti-woke activities.
Yes, there was an announcement this week on Barry Weiss's Substack of a new university called the University of Austin, which is your classic kind of, if you want to start a new educational institution that has no formal accreditation or anything, give it a name that is sufficiently close to an existing prestigious institution like University of Texas at Austin. And I think that it's what's listed as its headquarters is actually very close to that university. So, yeah, it's this new university that its board consists of all of these sort of well-known intellectual dark web figures. I mean, as well as being announced on Barry Weiss's Substack, you have people like Steven Pinker involved in it. And, yeah, the idea is to have this new university that is unconstrained by what it sees as the kind of existing intellectual orthodoxy in other universities. And one of the things that they're promising is that they will teach students forbidden courses.
Is that like the forbidden dance lambada?
I don't know, but none of this is happening until 2024, allegedly. And they have acknowledged that they're going to need to get some kind of academic accreditation from somewhere. Otherwise, there'll be no real reason for students to come to this university.
What are these forbidden courses? Is it like they're teaching Mein Kampf? Like, are they...
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, they, I suppose they can say, we're going to take on these subjects that the Orthodox Academy never touches. But the reality is that all of this stuff is explored in standard universities. If you really want to go, forbidden things, are you going to teach Holocaust denial? Are you going to teach creationism as mainstream science? Are you going to have a law school that is entirely devoted to the abolition of the age of consent? I mean, is this what it's actually? Is it going to be that much of a libertarian paradise? Almost certainly not. I think that. I don't know what this is actually going to look like in practice. It could just be a fucking dumb publicity stunt that that this crew all specialises in. But it will be fascinating to see the direction that this goes in.
It's an interesting idea. I suppose, the thing for me is, I don't know. I obviously, there's no details at this point in time, but just from first principles, I just think to myself, the kind of people who are into this, the kind of people who like to tell truths. They like to go around telling truths and taking hot takes and stuff. Like, those people like being the outsiders in their community. They like being I've forgotten the word. The start with C. Doesn't matter. But
I'm sure some of our listeners filled that blank in.
It's going to be in the comments for sure. Like, people who go their own way, who enjoy saying the opposite of everyone else.
Jazz, the word that you were looking for was contrarian.
That's it, contrarian. I am one of those people myself, so I understand how those people think. And if you had a room full of those people
in the comments might have some interesting spellings of that word.
Okay, yes. If you're one of those people, the last thing you want to do is be in a room filled with those people, because then you're just like everyone else. You'd hate it. And those people really would give you the shits. Once again, I can say this, I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
It's just
There's a good reason why almost no collective action by the intellectual dark web has ever got off the ground before.
Yeah, yes, that is true. It's Well, I think it would suck, but anyway. We'll see. It's
and just the thing to mention about this is that the whole discourse that this arises out of, which is the stifling intellectual orthodoxy, lack of freedom of speech on campus, it's amazing how narrowly this is focused on, first of all, very specific kind of slices of the academy, mainly in certain parts of the humanities that do look a lot at race and gender issues. But second, that it's always focused on either Ivy League or Ivy League proximate institutions, the Harvards and Stanfords and and Yales of the world. It's this absolute obsession on usually the English departments or gender studies departments or African American studies departments in those universities. And so something like Cornell West moving from university to university becomes this sort of nationally televised saga. And, what it ultimately comes down to is that, the people fixated on wokeness in the academy, it's an incredibly narrow and also very, very elitist view, right? And this is what gives the whole game away. They're not actually interested in the experiences of millions of college students across the United States. If they're absolutely honest with themselves, they would understand that even if even if people in universities were to attempt indoctrination, it wouldn't work. As my friend Paul Musgrave says, people think I'm turning the students into communists. I can't even get them to do the readings. The fact is that as academics, we actually have very little power over what our students think, or over their deepest convictions anyway. What conservatives get upset about is the fact that students have those convictions in the first place. And what they're really upset about is what they see as control of their rightful institutions, apparently being in the hands of liberals, which they're not even in the hands of liberals anyway. They're not even in the hands of the left, if you look at the way that places like Harvard and Stanford are actually run. But the fact that in these, halls of elitism, the fact that ideas that they don't like, get showcased in those places, that's what they're really upset about. It's not actually about the overall picture of what universities look like, because 99% of universities in the US never even get mentioned in this discourse.
That is certainly true. We'll no doubt be talking more about this next week when I've already forgotten what we're going to be calling about destroying wokeness or wherever it was. So I'm sad to hear though, Dave, that you won't be teaching at the University of Austin. The University of Austin in 3 years' time. From the sounds of things, it might end up being like that Simpsons episode where Homer goes to college and the dean is always trying to he's plays bass for the Pretenders, and it's the dean here is going to be the guy from Barstool Sports or something, and he's going to be just downing kegs, and it's because he's going to be as anti-PC as he possibly can be. Anyway, we'll see. Let's talk about something else, shall we? Let's talk about Rittenhouse. Have you been following the court case at all?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I read about the judge is being described as flamboyant. I don't know about you. The last thing I want to see in a criminal trial is a fucking flamboyant judge.
Yeah, look, I've watched probably about 3 hours of it so far. I'm not seeing the flamboyance, I've got to say. I wouldn't describe him as Peter Allen reincarnated, but let me tell you a couple of things I've observed. First of all, where we're at the moment is as always, I'm a few hours behind, but where I left it this morning in American time, there were competing calls for mistrial. From the left, there was a call for mistrial because apparently the judge's phone ringtone is "God Bless the USA," Lee Greenwood, the song that Trump plays at his rallies.
Oh, God,
And so they'll go, he must be biased. I think you've probably got to do better than that to get a mistrial, to be honest. And on the right, the call for mistrial was because, at least this is a legal reason, the prosecutor was having a go at Rittenhouse yesterday for staying silent until he'd heard the entire case against him and case for him, and then commenting, which of course is a real no-no to suggest that there's anything untoward about that in America, because you have the right to retain your silence whenever you want as the accused. Yeah. So that's not great that he did that, but he got chewed out by the judge, and I don't think that's really grounds for a mistrial myself. But anyway, that's what people are saying. Either way, it would be a real shame for Rittenhouse if there was a mistrial for any reason, because he is totally going to get off. At least
that's the impression that I'm getting.
Yeah, yes. At least the murder he's going to get off. There's other charges as well. Yeah. Just for those who don't remember, he killed 2 people and he shot another one, and he's been charged with intentional homicide, reckless homicide, attempted intentional homicide. That's the 3 shootings, and then 2 counts of reckless endangerment and underage possession of a deadly weapon and violating the Kenosha curfew. That's what they were the total charges. And the prosecution, at least of the murder charges, which is why I've been watching, I haven't seen them mention reckless endangerment at all. That might be yet to come. Has been really half-assed. Firstly, there was the witness, Gage Grosskreutz, I think is the way you say it.
Yes, yeah.
And to explain why he's so important, he's the guy who was shot who survived, right? And so number one, he can testify for himself, unlike the other two. Number two, the reason he's really important is because, like, when we watched the original footage, like I remember talking about this when it happened, saying there's absolutely no way Rittenhouse is going to get in trouble for the first two shootings, because the first one, the guy clearly attacked him when he shot at him, and the second one, the guy hit him over the head with a skateboard amongst this crowd, like turning around. Like shooting yourself in self-defense seems rather obvious in that case, as far as self-defense goes in trials. All right. The third one was a guy who had a gun but wasn't using the gun. He was there with his hands up, and he got shot in the arm. That's Grosskreutz, right? And so you go, okay, this is the one where if Rittenhouse is going to get in trouble for any of them, this will be the one. So he was a really important witness, this guy, right? But for whatever reason, he seems to have received absolutely no preparation whatsoever from the prosecution. Like, it's like he went jogging Forrest Gump style after the event. He's been running for the last year and then just ran straight into the courtroom. Anyone get him to watch the video or to discuss what's happened?
I was wondering where you were going with the Forrest Gump thing.
Well, yeah, it's like he's lost to the world. Yeah, like he received no preparation. He just contradicted himself a lot, right? I've got a few examples here which have gotten around if you haven't seen them. First of all, I mean, his own prosecution, the guy who he's helping, had to fact check him about when he pulled out his own gun, which I can play for you right here.
We just saw you come running into the screen from the right. You're just behind that figure in the white shirt. Before this moment, had you drawn your firearm?
No.
Where was it?
Like I mentioned at the beginning, I keep my pistol holstered in the small of my back.
But don't you have it in your hand at this point?
I can't see. Okay. Can't see from this video.
And then a minute later, the prosecutor says...
I want to back up for a second, Mr. Grosskreutz, because we have other video that shows you pulling your gun out before those shots are fired.
So he directly contradicts what's on the video. He hasn't seen the video of the shooting. He's the only one in America who hasn't seen the video of the shooting and directly contradicts it in his testimony. That's number one. Then the defense got involved and had to fact check him as well about when he pulled out his gun.
And then it goes on a narrative version of your statement. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And if I could, toward the end of that large paragraph, you'd agree it says, sometime during the incident, my Gen 4 Glock 27 that had a belt clip attached fell off my waist. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. That's a lie, right?
I wouldn't say that's a lie, no.
You didn't take the Glock out of your back here and run with it?
I did.
So it didn't fall off your waist. It was in your hand.
That's correct.
So you would say that's not a lie?
No, I would say it isn't.
Okay, and you told that to multiple officers. Isn't that true?
I don't know.
Same exhibit, sir. The next sentence. I told multiple officers that I dropped my firearm. Right?
Correct.
Okay.
So that was a bit embarrassing as well, contradicting himself twice, his own written statements. But this is the big one. This is what the claim of self-defense from Rittenhouse is all about. Observe.
Now, you'd agree your firearm is pointed at Mr. Rittenhouse, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And once your firearm is pointed at Mr. Rittenhouse, that's when he fires his gun. Yes?
No.
Sir, look, I don't want to... Does this look like right now your arm is being shot?
That looks like my bicep being vaporized, yes.
Okay. And it's being vaporized as you're pointing your gun directly at him. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so when you were standing 3 to 5 feet from him with your arms up in the air, he never fired, right?
Correct.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
So that's the end of the trial. Right there. As soon as he says, when my hands were up, he didn't fire. As soon as I pointed my gun at him, he fired. That's self-defense. That's it. So I don't understand how this witness got to this point, or how the charges got to this point, so that there was such an obvious defence for Rittenhouse that was going to come out in court. But yeah, so be it. So anyway, so that wasn't great for the prosecution. But I just want to say one more thing about how badly they did. That the one charge that was a complete no-brainer was that he violated Kenosha's curfew. He's not going to get 20 years jail for that. That's pretty minor, but still, that's a real no-brainer. He was out past curfew time. But that charge has been dismissed. You know why?
Why?
Because before they rested their case, the prosecution didn't bother to establish that the curfew existed. So the judge just said, well, okay. The judge just said, well, I have to dismiss that charge. You didn't demonstrate it. Thank you. So there's some real amateur hour going on in this case. But do you have anything to say about the trial before I go on?
Not really, other than just, I mean, yeah, like for everything that you've pointed out, it is incredibly unlikely that he's going to be found guilty of murder or a lot of the other charges. The issue is a heavily armed society in which something like this can happen more or less legally. In which someone, in which ad hoc militias can get together over Facebook and then, all come together to carry, to threaten with guns a protest where the protesters are also carrying guns. And of course this shit is going to happen. Yeah, and it's not going to be murder because there are so many fucking guns around. Yeah. It is a really deeply problematic condition.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I'm going to pick up where you left off there as well because I was about to say, I'm not so interested. I always thought he was overcharged. I said that at the time. None of this is surprising from a legal point of view. But what annoys me, to pick up from where you left off there, is the tone of the reaction to this trial, because it plays into exactly what you just said. I want to play 30 seconds from ever hopeful culture warrior and Senate candidate J.D. Vance. You can only imagine what he has to say about this all. You don't need to imagine it. I'll play it.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us as patriots to stand up, because if we don't fight back against the lawlessness, if we don't defend this young boy who defended his community when no one else was doing it, it may very well be your baby boy that they come for. It'll be your children whose lives they try to destroy when no one else is defending their communities.
That is so in keeping with the tone of the reaction, this triumphalist reaction where they're talking about how he's defending his community. The number of times I've heard that talking point, he was defending his community.
Yeah.
He's from a different state.
Yes, yeah.
He travelled from a different state holding a gun that he wasn't allowed to have, not even close to being allowed to have. I don't know why. He's looking for trouble. Like he was
absolutely looking for trouble. He travelled 20 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, looking for trouble. This is not about defending a community. This is about the sickness of a society where let's turn up to an armed protest with an armed counter-protest with guns is a form of entertainment for people.
Yeah.
It's fucking sick.
And he no doubt had hope of being seen as a hero because of it, because this culture venerates that kind of attitude. Yeah. And he is being seen as a hero, which means the next time this happens, there will be twice as many heroes turning up with their guns to get a piece of the action.
Absolutely. Especially as we have established that this is the Supreme Court's second highest priority. They're prepared to throw abortion under the bus. I mean, they're prepared to throw pro-lifers under the bus in order to preserve gun rights.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get to that in a second as well. Just be clear, I don't think he's guilty of murder. But he's clearly not doing something good. You don't cheer for him like he's a sporting hero, but people are. And so, at least one person who is dead, it was a genuine hero. Not the child molesting guy who was trying to attack him, the other guy with the skateboard who wasn't even armed and was trying to apprehend the dude who was going around shooting people. That guy was a hero and he is dead because of it. If he was in a school or something like that, Fox News would be all over him as this superhero who tried to save the school. It's not good that he's dead. It's not good that this guy turned up where he didn't belong and then ended up shooting this dude because he got himself in a situation where he was way out of his depth and got scared. I don't think he should go to jail for murder, but it's not good. And I hate the fact he's been venerated for it. He's been celebrated.
And described as a young boy.
Yeah, well, that as well. Yes. Yeah, and I just want to just link this to the clip I played last week, the Charlie Kirk question. When can we start using our guns? There are, I don't want to turn this into a passing thing, but there are a few too many people on the right, and it's not everyone on the right, but there's a few too many people on the right, in my view, who want a civil war, who want the chance to use guns because they like the idea of, they romanticize it. They like the chance of kicking ass.
And also, they always believe, fundamentally, that the police and army and courts will be on their side.
Yes.
This is what, they always believe that.
Well, this is like that. I wasn't going to talk about this, but I'll put a link in the. I'll put a link in the homework about this. This is like that memo that was written by the Claremont Institute. Did you hear about this one? About their fantasy of what was going to happen. Remember the lefties had their own little fantasy about what they were going to do if Trump tried to steal the election. They had this little symposium where they were all talking about what was going to happen, and it was I mocked it on our podcast at the time. It was, in my view, a bit pathetic, but at least it wasn't violent. Whereas then the Claremont Institute had their own fantasy sequence, and it was just all about them shooting protesters and the police joining in and helping them, and it was just this violent fantasy. These
fucking people, what enables these violent fantasies is their belief that the cops will always be on their side. And certainly when you look at the Rittenhouse situation where the cops thanked him for being there before he went off and shot people, and then when he went up to them after shooting people and admitted he just shot people, the cops kind of ignored him. You can see where this belief comes from.
I'm not going to talk about Arbery, but I was going to talk about Arbery and talk about the difference between this case and the Arbery case. The three people charged with the murder of Arbery. Remember that black jogger in Georgia? Yep. That case is very different to the Rittenhouse case. Those guys are in a lot of trouble. I'll talk about them another time, but we're running out of time here with Dave. So I want to, at the very least, we should get you to talk about saving Australia, because we've been putting this off a couple of weeks now.
We have been putting this off.
So why don't you tell us about that?
Because the Save Australia protest in New York was more than a month ago now. But so this was this very puzzling protest of people in New York carrying Australian flags. It's the sort of thing that you would expect to see outside of the Chinese consulate when the crackdown on Hong Kong is happening. It was that sort of vibe, this sort of Save Australia vibe. Now, this wasn't just a bunch of crazies in New York. There was a lot of discourse about this in American media, and Ron DeSantis actually at some function questioned whether Australia had as much freedom as communist China, given what was happening in Australia with lockdowns and vaccination. So there was actually a lot of kind of elite discourse about this, and I feel it's worth giving some historical context to this, which is Australia has often actually played this role for the American right. So, I mean, Tucker Carlson almost said it explicitly. He said, we think of Australia as just being like a tougher, freer version of the United States, but look what's actually happening, blah, 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 blah. So there's this right-wing American fantasy that Australia is like this kind of paradise of just sort of unrestrained masculinity.
Like
and,
Texas. They see this like Texas.
Yeah, nobody cares about any laws or anything, and the government is hardly even there. There's always been this this sort of right-wing fantasy, but the things have changed. That Australia is this fallen place, that all of a sudden there's this government overreach. And the whole thing is, it's a moronic moral fairy tale about, well, if it can happen there, it can happen here too. And this didn't begin with vaccination. I mean, I don't know when it actually began, but the earliest instance that I can see of it is with gun control implemented after the Port Arthur massacre in 1996. So in the 2000s, there was this chain email that was circulating, which I think, according to Snopes, the earliest instance that they can find of it is 2009. But I think I can remember seeing it earlier than that. It's one of these things which, by its nature, is hard to trace. But anyway, it's there sometime in the 2000s, purporting to be from an Australian police officer who is saying that ever since gun control was implemented in Australia, he refers to it as last year gun control was implemented, even though this email was sometime in the 2000s, that, you know, murder is through the roof and Australians are afraid to leave their houses and blah, blah, blah. It starts with this very ominous historical thing about, you know, supposedly the Holocaust began with gun control and blah, 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 all this bullshit. You know, and this stuff was lapped up in right-wing circles in the US. So Australia is this very useful foil because of right-wing fantasies about it. And yeah, because of the fact that it's kind of similar enough to us, to the US, that people can have sympathy with it and can sort of imagine similarities with Australia. But at the same time, Australia is so distant from the US that nobody is ever going to bother actually looking into what's happening here. So this is just the latest manifestation of that. Now, of course, what this is also fed by is the cross-pollination between right-wing Australian media and right-wing American media, which is, you know, not that surprising given that the same major media company is in both countries and was originally started by an Australian. And given that Sky News here, or at least Sky News After Dark here, one of its major areas of business these days is actually its YouTube channel rather than its, you know, broadcasting in Australia. So Cameron Wilson had a very good article about this a few months ago, just about how many YouTube views Sky News clocks up compared to how many people are watching it in Australia.
Yeah.
And even though you can't get the, you know, geocoded numbers on this, it's fairly obvious that that is, you know, that when videos are getting 5 million views, that's mostly not Australians. That is mostly Americans.
I was going to say, there's so many Sky News videos that have millions of views. Yeah.
And a lot of Australians just look at right-wing media and also look at certain right-wing politicians as well, like Pauline Hanson, Craig Kelly, just babbling on and thinking, this makes no fucking sense. It makes perfect sense when you remember their main audience is no longer Australians. It's American crazies on YouTube, okay? And that's why we now have legislation being introduced in Australia for voter ID laws, which it's even more absurd to construe that as a problem in Australia than it is to construe it as a problem in the US. It's a total non-issue here. This is just so that Pauline Hanson can go back to her predominantly American YouTube audience and tell them that, you know, she's fighting the good fight. So, yeah, this sort of media cross-pollination, contributes to it as well. They can always find some Australian, usually Craig Kelly, to go on Fox News and tell them that Australia has turned into this absolute tyranny and that Australians are crying out for, you know, Ron DeSantis to come in and be our Prime Minister. Ron DeSantis even said that he was getting people from Australia writing to him saying, you know, please come and save Australia. So this is where all the Save Australia bullshit is coming from.
I got a lot to say about Ron DeSantis. I think I'll save it for next week because because it's going to take too long. But what I will say about this topic is that absolutely what you've just said, but it's not just while it does play into an existing stereotype that the right have about Australia, it's not just the right that are going on about Australia as this dictatorship. That is like on CNN, about a month ago, they had constant rotation of the viral videos of protesters being arrested and police knocking on people's doors, asking them if they know anyone who's going to protest. And there were probably about 7 or 8 viral videos about oppression in Australia, which has had millions of views. And Americans were obsessed with those 8 videos. Like they was rolling them and rolling them and rolling them. And when I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, I live in Australia, and I'm pretty sure that I can do whatever the hell I want. And even though we're in the middle of lockdown in Sydney, I walk into a store and half the people there don't have masks on, and it's not what they're saying. It's it's definitely not. It's not worse than China, I'm pretty sure. But I thought to myself, this is one of those moments when I think we should step back and remember this, that when you judge a country by viral videos, it might not be representative of that country. And I say this as a representative of a show which plays a bunch of viral videos about another country. It's just something that we should bear in mind, that that America and and England and so forth might not be exactly what the viral videos suggest. And red states, like Alabama might not be what the viral videos you've seen from Alabama would suggest. I think it behoves us just to bear in mind how wrong people get us when we're getting other people.
Yes.
So
bear this in mind. The population of Ghana does not entirely consist of dancing pallbearers, for example.
That's going into the show description. Nice one, Dave. We got 7 more minutes here. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to just briefly... Is there anything else you want to talk about, Dave, before we lose you, before we go to Chaz Unleashed?
No.
No, okay. I'm going to briefly cover something which you might have something to say about, which is I was going to set this up by talking about the Biden vaccine mandates, what the actual vaccine mandates said. I'll save that for Chaz Unleashed. We'll come back to that. But you can rewind after I talk about the vaccine mandate to talk about the court case with the vaccine mandate, because there's some prime hypocrisy here, which I think is worth noting.
Yes. And this comes back to the fact that American politics mainly seems to consist of people seeking temporary court orders to block things at the moment.
Yes. Well,
that's basically it. That's the whole game.
At the moment, there's a bunch of different appeals courts hearing lawsuits trying to block the vaccine mandate. One of them is the Fifth Circuit, which is the most conservative of the appeals courts. They have already issued an emergency stay, even though the actual mandate doesn't kick in for 2 months. It's an emergency that they stay it now. Why? Because the petitions give cause to believe there are grave statutory and constitutional issues with the mandate. The mandate is hereby stayed. Okay, so grave statutory and constitutional issues. The 3 judges who wrote that are the exact 3 judges who not only allowed SB 8 to go into to go into effect, which really did have grave constitutional issues that even the Supreme Court is admitting had grave constitutional issues, but they refused to allow a lower court to even hold a hearing for a potential injunction. That's how far they came over the top. Those same 3 people who are now pushing an injunction against this, even though it doesn't even happen for 2 months. But I mentioned it on the show. What I didn't mention was this. This is the really interesting one. They're trying to pass a permanent injunction, even though the petitioners didn't ask for a permanent injunction. They asked for a preliminary injunction. You might go, well, why would they do that? Here is why. The way it works in America, when you've got a bunch of different circuits hearing the same case, they have a ballot where they decide which circuit is going to hear the case. So they don't waste having 6 different circuits hearing the same case. That could be any of the circuits that hear this case. Probably won't be the 5th. That's the 5th Circuit. That's just probabilities suggest it won't be. But it might be. It's a ballot. Normally what happens is if someone institutes a preliminary injunction, that gets stayed when the ballot is drawn and the other court hears the case. There's no case law about permanent injunctions. This is new and uncharted territory. So if they pass a permanent injunction, even if they don't get the case, and the other court gets a case, the permanent injunction may still hold. It's just more legal chicanery. Now, obviously it's going to go to the Supreme Court anyway at the end, so it doesn't really matter, but it just seems so hackish that they're just trying to have whatever influence they possibly can to put their thumb on the scale, which is I just find very depressing. So that's that. I just wanted to mention that. The other thing I want to mention is the Supreme Court. There's some real hackishness going on at the moment. The Texas prisons case. You across this one?
No.
Okay, very quickly. There was a case called Dunn versus Ray back in 2019, which was about a Muslim prisoner in Alabama who wanted to have an imam preached to him as he was being executed because they had a provision for a chaplain, but not for an imam. Now, it seems like a real open and shut freedom of religion case, you would have thought.
Yes.
The Supreme Court said he couldn't have an imam. You want to go, huh? How did that happen? How did that happen? The reason that they said he couldn't have an imam because his court challenge came too late. It came on the 28th of January. His execution was the 7th of February. They said that's just too late. He should have done it earlier. Now, he didn't even find out that they rejected his application until the 23rd of January. But the court said he should have applied much earlier than that anyway, which is weird. But anyway, that became a massive outrage when that happened. People just said that is indefensible, and there was another case where they tried to backtrack a bit because that was such an obvious outrage, that case in 2019. Okay, so now there's a new case. In the tradition of these cases, this is Ramirez, this guy Ramirez in Texas. He wants to be preached to as he's being executed, but he wants the preacher to touch him when he prays. He doesn't care what part of his body. He just wants the preacher to lay hands on him as he prays. That's the way he wants to be prayed, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and the court, they've got Alito, Thomas, Kavanaugh, and Roberts seem to be pushing towards no, and the three Liberals and Coney Barrett, are pushing towards yes.
Yeah, you know why Coney Barrett?
Well, she's really into religion.
Charismatic
Yeah.
Catholic.
Oh, of course,
Charismatic
yes.
Christianity is the one where touching is very important.
There you go. And Gorsuch appears to be in the middle. They're not sure which way Gorsuch is going to go. He's the deciding judge on this one, right?
Well, he's an Episcopalian, and I'm not sure if he's going to be too into this touching shit.
Well, now the hypocrisy is in the arguments being used by, I'm going to read you some quotes from Alito, Thomas, and Kavanaugh. Bear in mind, before I read you these, the Roberts Court since 2005 has ruled in favour of all religious claims 81% of the time, compared to 58% of the time for the Rehnquist Court. They're really into religious claims, right? Religious liberty, they're really big on that. Now, let me read you some quotes. Alito was worried about that if the law requires prisons to accommodate unusual, even unique religious beliefs, a decision for Ramirez would open the floodgates to more litigation by death row inmates. Quote,
What? Unusual religious beliefs?
yes.
There are between 500 and 600 million Christians worldwide who follow that form of Christianity.
Okay, that's a great point. That's a great point, but just wait for your outrage because there's more coming.
There's like 60 million in the United States.
The quote from him is, we can look forward to an unending stream of variations he was concerned about. Clarence Thomas says inmates might game the system by claiming to adhere to religious beliefs that they do not actually hold.
Fucking Christ.
I knew you'd like this.
I'm going to pretend to convert to Pentecostalism just so I can have a minister touch me as I die.
Kavanaugh's worried that an inmate might try to move the goalposts in future cases. This is the quote from Kavanaugh. This is a potential huge area of future litigation across a lot of areas. The sincerity of religious claims. How do we question those? Some things that people have talked about are the incentives someone might have to be insincere, behavioural inconsistencies, the religious tradition of the practice. What do we look at to check sincerity? Because that's a very awkward thing for a judge to do, to say, I want to look into the sincerity of your claim. But our case law says we must do that. So they're worried that people are going to fake religious claims. That is the concern of every religious claim case. Every single one. The contraception ones, the vaccine mandates. There isn't a single religion out there that's against vaccines. But there's all these bullshit.
There is one.
Is it? Which one?
Yeah, Christian Science.
No, Christian Scientists are okay with the COVID vaccine.
Really?
Yes, they're okay with it. I know. I've read an article at the Christian Scientists and COVID vaccines.
Okay.
They're okay with it. I'm pretty sure. If there's not, I'll issue a correction. But I'm pretty sure I've read an article about this.
In Australia, they're exempt from other vaccines.
Yeah, well, I'm just telling you. I read an article about the Christian Scientists and COVID vaccines, which suggested that they're okay with that.
Okay,
But there's so many bullshit religious exemption claims on COVID vaccines at the moment. And they're also obviously all trying to game the system. No one's worried about that, but they're worried about when it comes to prisoners and death row inmates. It's just so blatantly hypocritical.
It basically strikes me as the religious claims you should be the most okay about honouring. When someone is actually about to be killed by the state and is obviously going to be in a place where they want as much repentance and possibility to reconcile with their God as possible, because in most cases they've done something very bad, and in all cases they're facing the worst possible situation. That should absolutely be the time when you honour people's religious claims and perhaps aren't so obsessed with, are they sincere about this? I mean, especially also, religious conversions can happen at any time. Religious conversions can happen days before people die. It's when you think about the kind of unique stresses of being executed, there are going to be people who have sincere religious conversions, very close to the execution date. And who does it hurt? Who does it hurt? If you let an imam into the jail, or if you let a minister in who is going to touch somebody.
Well, their argument is that these people are trying to create unnecessary delays with legal action, and I would say, okay, how much delay can you cause? Okay, so maybe push it off a week or so. I mean, look, this is the context where death penalties are sometimes pushed off for years because they don't have the right chemicals or because of technical reasons. A couple of days, who cares? It's very strange to me, I have to say. And I'm surprised that people who are as intelligent as these people are, we sometimes trash the things they say. There's no doubt that all of them are very intelligent people, would open themselves to such obvious accusations of hypocrisy and bias, given that they are obsessed with religious freedom. I find that very strange. But anyway, Dave.
Anyway, I've got to go.
You got to go.
It's actually taken me 5 minutes beyond home time.
I know. I'm very tricky like that. The way I introduced at the very end, knowing that you couldn't resist. Dave, thank you so much. You can say bye to everyone, and I'll see you. Yeah, I'll see you guys on the other side of the white flash with Chaz Unleashed. Welcome back to the podcast, and it is now time for a thorough unleashing in Chaz Unleashed. I've had myself a nice little edit. The show is done. I have had a little sleep under my desk in my usual tradition, and I am ready to roll. I'm going to try and keep this a little bit. This will be a smaller unleashing than the last unleashing, which went forever and was mostly about tax. This is going to be slightly more relatable and slightly shorter. I hope that doesn't bother the fans of the unleashing out there. Let's get into it. Okay, first of all, we mentioned one of the topics we mentioned on the show, which I wanted to add a little bit more to, was the executive privilege claim from Trump that was just rejected by U.S. District Court Judge Tanya Chutkan. It's not surprised that she rejected Trump's executive privilege claim. I should explain what I mean by the executive privilege claim, and that is that the January 6th Commission has asked for all these emails that Trump sent at the time and around January 6th, and all the things that he had done to maybe or maybe not help along the rally that occurred and the push to stage a coup, as they like to call it, or whatever exotic activities he was up to at that point in time. And he says you can't have them because that is all. As the president, I am claiming executive privilege over that conduct at the time, and those communications. Executive privilege is not, by the way, there's no legislation for executive privilege. That's something that's evolved over time in courts. But the theory behind it is that the government, especially the president, needs to be able to conduct his or her official affairs knowing that they're not going to be poured over the moment they stop being president. So they can president in relative freedom. That's the idea. But there was never much chance that this executive privilege claim was going to be respected by the courts for a number of reasons. Firstly, Trump's case was terrible, as often is the case in Trump court cases. You just read it and go, wow, I hope this doesn't win, because this is setting terrible precedents for the future. His case was that he can just claim executive privilege whenever he likes. It's like he's still the president. The precedence is just, that's not the case. It's that he can ask for executive privilege, but the person who grants executive privilege is the current executive. And Trump did ask for executive privilege, and Biden denied that executive privilege. So that's how it normally goes. It's the mindset that's the worrying thing with Trump. He just thinks he can just do whatever he likes. As the judge put it, quote, plaintiff does not acknowledge the deference owed to the incumbent president's judgment. His position that he may override the express will of the executive branch appears to be premised on the notion that his executive power exists in perpetuity. That's a fine summary of how Trump thinks. She then went on to say that, but presidents are not kings. The plaintiff is not president. He retains the right to assert that his records are privileged, but the incumbent president is not constitutionally obliged to honour that assertion. Okay, to that extent, we talked about this on the show. I won't talk a little bit more though. There are all kinds of reasons why his executive privilege claim would be rejected. Remember, executive privilege is meant to be, it's a court doctrine that's meant to be about Trump being allowed to conduct his official duties with a certain degree of privacy in the future. This is not his official duties. This is campaigning. You don't believe me? Well, he paid for it out of campaign funds. That's campaigning. They paid $225,000 to firms owed by Bernie Kerik and Rudy Giuliani, the Trump political campaign, the Trump election campaign, for rooms in the Willard Hotel, where all these meetings happened between him and the January 6th poobahs, this little team who all got together and tried to work out ways that Trump could stay president somehow. So they paid for our campaign funds. So it was clearly a campaign issue. That's not appropriate for executive privilege. Simple. What's interesting though about all this is that Youngkin didn't just deny his executive privilege claim. She denied his motion for a temporary injunction to stay her ruling. So normally how this works is when a judge rules against someone and they know they're going to appeal, they'll stay the ruling pending an appeal. So they go, okay, at least we won't enforce the ruling until you've had a chance to appeal. She didn't do that because she just showed complete contempt for his claim. She said, well, you're not going to win this. This is just wasting time. So I'm not going to give you a stay. The order is good. You can try and appeal if you want, but the order is still good until someone else says otherwise. So what that means is, since she's shown that rank disrespect for his claim, he needs to get a stay from an appeals court or a ruling from an appeals court real fast. Otherwise, the records are going to be handed over to the January 6th committee before he has the chance to stop them, regardless of whether he has a case in appeals court or not. Like I said, that's unusual because normally they would say, well, we don't want to ruin any chance of you actually effectively stopping these records coming out if you have a potential case here. But she's saying, well, you don't have a potential case, so I'm not going to waste the court's time. The first batch of records is due on November 26th. What's that? That's 2 weeks away. So, I mean, Trump might get the appeals court to immediately give a stay, in which case that's fine. But if he doesn't, those records might be handed over before he even gets to the appeals stage. So we'll see. And to be honest, no. I was about to say I kind of hope they are because he's clearly wasting time. But he should avail himself of his legal rights. So I do actually want him to have an appeal. I just want it to be a very quick appeal and for him to lose. And then he'll appeal again and then lose very quickly, hopefully. So it's only a matter of a few weeks rather than sort of running out the clock till the end of November 2022, which is what I'm sure he wants to do. Let me, just before we leave that topic, I want to paint you a very colourful, vivid picture of an alternative universe. Let's call it Earth 2, where the Republicans control the Senate and Congress right now. On this planet, Josh Mandel, Senator Mandel from Ohio, who is the Trumpiest Trumpster that ever trumped, he tweeted just now, today is the 1 year anniversary of November 3, 2020, and the 1 year anniversary of the crime of the century. I am calling to abolish the January 6th Commission and replace it with a November 3rd Commission. We must stop Democrat cheating. Sadly, I'd give the chances of the alternative universe becoming the real universe in 2023, I'd give the chances of that almost 100%. And that commission is probably going to come to reality, our reality on Earth 1. But in the meantime, we can just look at Josh Mandel's tweets as a portal to another world and we can shudder. I told you that I was going to talk through a little bit of detail on the COVID vaccine mandates. That's going to be the legal ground for the next few months. So let me take you through it now. We mentioned obviously the vaccine mandates to some extent on the Planet America, but I'm going to go into slightly more detail of the way these work. All right, it's called Emergency Temporary Standard, or an ETS, not to be confused with ETSs, which were emission trading schemes back about 10 years ago. If you're into climate change, like climate change politics, like I am, they call this an ETS. Every single time it weeds me out a little bit. Okay, so the ETS, it requires all employers with 100 or more employees. That's 84 million workers we're talking about there. They've got to receive COVID-19 vaccinations or submit to weekly COVID tests and wear masks in the workplace. That's what the mandate says. Okay, so it's a test, so it's a vaccine or testing mandate, not just a vaccine mandate like some populists like to pretend. Who pays for the tests? Great question. It's unclear. It costs about $500 a year. So if it's the workers who pay for the tests, then that's a bit of a punishment in itself. The mandate just requires tests to occur. It doesn't say whether the workers or the employees should pay the test. The government's not paying for the test, I'll tell you that much. It also contains a carve out for employees who aren't at the workplace, which could be a lot of workers. I mean, like truck drivers, for instance, they've already said they're probably not covered by this. It could be especially people who work from home. It could be a lot of people who are exempt. Also has medical and religious exemptions as well. It importantly preempts all the state and local regulations that would contradict it. So if you think about Texas, if you think about Florida, these kinds of states where you're not allowed to have a mandate, this explicitly overrules those states. And so that may well be a grounds for an appeal for a start in court. That might be, well, some of the states have already tried to sue on those grounds, but they're going to fold this all into one big court case, I expect. If employers breach the mandate, you've got some real fines here. It's not like the OH&S fines that we've talked about on the podcast before, which are a slap on the wrist. $13,653 per violation and $136,532 for willful or repeated violations. Each violation, 136 grand. So these could add up pretty quickly if someone wants to be obnoxiously partisan in their resistance. But look, they're largely not going to be partisan or they're not, or resist, businesses that is, because most businesses presumably want this. Like if you think about this, this is a real win-win for business because COVID doesn't help any business. It doesn't help their suppliers. It doesn't help their customers. It doesn't help them get employees. Like it doesn't help any business in any respect. So they'd love to try to get rid of COVID if they possibly could, and do whatever they can to get rid of it to help the business environment thrive again. But in this case, they get to fight COVID, but they get to blame Biden for it. They get to say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, employees, you got to get a vaccine because big bad Biden is making us do it. Oh no, sorry guys. Which is a bit of a win-win for businesses. It's a great situation where they get the eventuality they want without having to take responsibility for it. Like they get to blame Biden. And yeah, it might cost Biden some approval points in the short term, but if it works, then in the medium term or long term, the economy will go well and it will go better, and then he'll get those points back, presumably. Not every employer is going to like it though. Number one, some are just very partisan. Number two, to be honest, this mandate's much more of a pain for employers than for employees. We keep on hearing about the vaccine-resistant types. Well, they're kind of professional martyrs, but the employers, it actually is a bit of a nuisance. Like, let's go through what employers have to do. This is the mandate part. They have to, one, determine the vaccination status of every employee, okay, which might be easier said than done if the employee is being a pain in the ass about it. They have to obtain acceptable proof of vaccination from vaccinated employees when it's not always easy to get vaccination proof in America. They give out these tiny little cards that are cardboard. You could lose them. You might just not have them for whatever reason. They need to maintain a roster of each employee's vaccination status as well. They must, and by the way, this gets more complicated when the vaccines wear off, but we're going to get to that in a second, because we are getting to a point now where the vaccines are going to increasingly wear off. So you need to think about that for every step of these procedures. The employers have to give the employees up to 4 hours of paid leave when they get the shots. So they pay them to go and get the shots. Plus, they need to allow reasonable time and paid sick leave to recover from any side effects experienced from each vaccination dose. Even if they don't have paid leave, they still have to give them paid leave just for the vaccination side effects. Businesses have also got to make sure their unvaccinated workers are tested at least weekly. So they need to set up, even if the workers pay for the tests, the employers need to set up the testing regimen. And they need to require employees to provide prompt notice when they receive a positive COVID-19 test. So what I'm telling you here is that the onus is on the employers to make sure this all happens. If they have some particularly irritating employees who don't want to go along with it, or who are lying, or who are resisting in some way, the employers are responsible. They're the ones getting fined the $13,000 or $136,000. It's not the employees, it's the employers. So if you're an employer and you say have a branch in, say, Texas, and you got a bunch of Newsmax watchers in your staff and they're just causing you a nuisance, well, that's your problem as the employer. You need to either crack down on them or discipline them or sack them or do whatever to make them bend the knee, and they're not going to want to bend the knee. So that's your problem to replace them or to do whatever. So it isn't necessarily a good time for a lot of employers, even if they get the outcome they're looking for. The process might not be a pleasant process for them. So we should bear that in mind. The question is, what is worth more? The benefits of the economy picking up again, or the detriments of having to deal with unruly flock of employees? I guess that's going to be a decision each employer has to make for themselves. Interestingly, the Chamber of Commerce doesn't seem to have a problem with this mandate. They're very Republican, so it's in their interest to go politically with the right here. What they said was, it's not like they're cheering for it. It'd be hard to imagine them cheering for a Democrat proposal. What they said that OSHA, with their actual mandate, addressed some of their concerns, and then they just gave advice on how to best abide by it. Nothing else. No negative ads. No whinging. So what that tells me is that they kind of want this mandate, the Chamber of Commerce, but they don't want to overtly, visibly contradict the Republicans. So they're kind of being a bit quiet about it. That's the Chamber of Commerce. There are some other groups that are more explicitly not fans. The National Federation of Independent Business. They said that, quote, NFIB remains opposed to this rule that restricts the freedom of small business owners to decide how best to operate their own businesses, which is a great point. Like, I just went through this entire procedure that employees have to do. Can you imagine if you're a small business and you have to do that? It's not, in my view, it'd be very difficult to expect a small business to run all those processes while they're running a business. And as it turns out, the government agrees with me when I say that, because the vaccine mandate only applies to employers with 100 or more employees. Can't you read NFIB? It doesn't apply to small business. Equally not reading is the National Retail Federation, who said, quote, it will impose burdensome new requirements on retailers during the crucial holiday shopping season. It starts on January 4. I'm sure that's on purpose. I'm sure it's so they don't impose burdensome new requirements on retailers during the crucial holiday shopping season. I don't know what it says about these people. They don't even bother to read the standard before they send out press releases about it. I get the feeling they wrote those press releases weeks ago, and then they just press, copy, paste, date, enter. But whatever. I continue to think that we're not going to see much resistance from any businesses, because it's really in their interest that this is there. It's for them as much as anyone. Legal issues. Okay, because this is, I mentioned before the white flash, before we were in unleashed mode, I mentioned the hypocritical work from the Fifth Circuit Appeals Court. Let me talk about, like, whatever they do, whatever the Fifth Circuit get up to, there's going to be another court case from whoever draws the ballot out of the other Circuit Appeals Court. It'd be funny if it was the Fifth Circuit, after they've done so much to try and get around this process. And then whoever it is, it doesn't matter. It's going to go to the Supreme Court anyway. So these are the issues that they're going to be talking about in the Supreme Court. First of all, is it an emergency? Because this is an emergency temporary standard. When I say emergency temporary standard, the difference between an emergency standard, a normal standard, is, do you go through the comments process? Do you go through the process where you take comments from the community, you consider them all, you respond to them? It sounds like a very minor process, because you go, well, just ignore them. Just wait a few weeks, get the comments into the round file, away we go. Number one, you need to show that you paid attention to them, to the court. Number two, it's not just a couple of weeks. It'll be a few months of taking the comments, and then at least acting like you're taking them seriously and responding to them and adjusting tweaks of your proposal accordingly. The whole thing, it could take 3 months, could take 6 months, it could take a long time. But that's the difference between an emergency standard and the normal standard. They are going to be taking the comments, by the way, while this emergency standard is happening. They're going to take comments, and then they're going to eventually turn that to a regular rule from Mashaw. So the legal issues are: is it an emergency? Does it qualify for an emergency standard when they took 2 months to write it and they're giving it 2 months before they implement it? That doesn't sound much like an emergency. Personally, I think that's fair enough. Taking 2 months to write it, that's fair enough. You want to get it right. That's the fact that Trump's team used to just rush out these emergency rulings after a couple of days. That was part of the reason they just kept on losing in court every time they had an emergency ruling. I've forgotten the number. I think it was like 86 or 87% of the administrative cases they lost in court because they were slapdash. So yes, take the time, get it right. It's better to get it right than to have the standard thrown out in court. Taking 2 months to implement, I also think that's fair enough. There's a balance to be struck here. Obviously, the safest way to address a problem in the community is just to lock everyone up in their rooms, not let them out, and let them starve to death. They will probably not get COVID if you do that. But on the other hand, we live in a real world. This is not Earth 2. In a real world where people need to do things, they need to get food, they need to work, they need to go to school, they need to do things. And so we need to balance the attempt to combat whatever the pandemic is at the time versus the need to live life. And you have to balance that, right? I think giving businesses 2 months to implement these recommendations is a reasonable balance for a couple of reasons. First of all, I just told you it is actually quite a lot of work for the businesses who are implementing this. So you do, and they have more than 100 employees. So it's going to be a big task for them. So you do want to give them the time to do it right. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you went as fast as possible, you might give them a month, like 3 weeks or a month. That's going to take them right up to Christmas. Like it'll take them up to December, the middle of December. And it seems wildly impractical to the point of just not right to make businesses jump through hoops to implement this incredibly complicated standard. Bang, straight away, right in the middle of Christmas shopping. And then like a week later, they're on holiday. And then they come back 2 weeks later and go, well, that's just bullshit. Like you only got a week's worth of the standard before they're on holiday anyway, and you completely screwed up that business in the meantime. So I think a practical balance is to give them during the holidays to make the final tweaks before they implement the standards. And then when the employees come back after their holidays, the new standard's in place. That makes sense to me. So I actually think giving them 2 months does not undermine the emergency nature of the standard. All right. The actual legislation says for an emergency standard, it's when workers are in grave danger due to exposure to toxic substances or agents determined to be toxic or physically harmful or to new hazards. Okay, so there are 3 grounds for potential challenge there, I think. 1, when workers are in grave danger. Are they in grave danger now? COVID is a grave danger when the case fatality rate is less than 2%. It's like 1.5% at the moment. Is that grave danger? 1.5% dying? Is it grave danger? Obviously, they're more are hospitalized and more have potentially long COVID. Do you count long COVID as grave danger? Is it grave danger when you can get Regeneron, when you can get these new pills we've been talking about, the new COVID pills? If you take Regeneron or you take those pills, you're much more likely to have no problems. Is that grave danger? That's going to be for the court to determine. Toxic substances or agents. Does a pandemic count as a toxic substance or agent? Toxic substances or agents sounds like a chemical to me. Does a virus count? Apparently there have been times in the past where viruses have counted. I'm not sure there's a lot of case law on that, but there might be 1 or 2 cases. I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, that's a question that needs to be determined. When they say due to exposure to toxic substances or agents, does COVID count? When workers are in grave danger due to exposure to toxic substances or agents determined to be toxic or physically harmful, or to new hazards, does this count as a new hazard? It's been around for nearly 2 years now. Is that a new hazard? I don't know. Anyway, I'm not saying that they're going to lose because of that. I'm just saying these are the grounds that they might debate in court. And then you've got also issues about is this a state? Does this come under is this a state's role to control, or is this a federal government's role to control? Because they may well say that yes, this COVID is well worth controlling, but if Texas has their own regulations, the federal government shouldn't come over the top of Texas because this is not really a federal responsibility, they might say. So that's another issue for the courts. We'll talk more about this legal campaign over the months. There's a political campaign going on as well, obviously. It's turn on Fox News at night and almost every day there's someone who's resisting a mandate. There was one funny one a couple of weeks back where literally there have only been 36 of 4,500 West Point cadets who refused to get vaccinated. 36 of them, at less than 1%, refused to get vaccinated. And 3 of the 36 ended up on Hannity at once, talking about, being interviewed about how this is so horrible and so dictatorial and authoritarian in the army. There's a lot of dictatorial and authoritarian in the army. Anyway, yeah, if there's a person somewhere under a rock in a desert who's resisting, Hannity will find them and they will turn up on his show that night. So the political campaign is probably going to be a lot louder than the practical and legal campaign as far as resistance goes. Another issue, which we haven't heard much about, what happens when the vaccines start to wear off? Where does the mandate sit then? Are you complying with the mandate even when the vaccines wear off? I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. There's a Public Health Institute study recently. Researchers found that protection against COVID-19 declined for all vaccine types from 87.9% in February to 48.1% by October. What's that? February to October, that's 8 months. Declines for Pfizer went from 86.9% to 43.3%. Moderna went from 89.2% to 58%. Moderna is the one that seems to degrade the slowest, by the way. If you have a choice, J&J, Johnson & Johnson, went from 86.4% to 13%. Okay, so if in the 13% zone, are you still complying with the mandate? When do you stop complying with the mandate if you've been fully vaccinated? This is a pretty important question, one they have not addressed with the ETS, one which the permanent rule presumably will have to address. I repeat what I said on last week's Unleashed. I think it should be based on whether you have antibodies or not. I think they should give you an antibody test. I don't care when you are vaccinated. I don't care if you got sick. I don't care why you have antibodies. All that matters is, do you have antibodies? If you don't, get a vaccination. But that's going to be an issue as well. The main problem as well with all this, and this is the problem with Scott Gottlieb. You might recall he was the head of the FDA, I think, under Trump. And he's been the real voice of reason over the last 2 years. He's been saying a lot of reasonable things. He's been calling out when the FDA are kind of over the top or kind of missing the point a little bit. But at the same time, he speaks in real science. He doesn't speak in bullshit. And he's been saying all along he's worried about vaccine mandates, not because he doesn't think vaccines are very important, not because he thinks vaccine mandates won't make some difference. The reason why is because he's worried that it's going to affect other vaccines, that people's resistance to the COVID vaccine is going to bleed into resistance to all the other vaccines, and he's worried that there'll be significant negative repercussions of this push. That we might only get, like, America is sitting on what, 58% fully vaccinated at the moment, the population. This vaccine mandate might get them to 65%, it might get them to 70%, maybe if they're lucky, which is, by the way, where Australia is at the moment. But what's the cost of that? It's not going to get the herd immunity, so they're still going to have COVID. There'll be less COVID, a little less COVID, but there'll still be plenty of COVID if they're only at 65% vaccinated. But the cost of getting there, that little improvement, might be having a whole bunch of people with the measles or pertussis or something like that, which at the moment they get vaccinated for. Let me tell you the numbers. I think Scott Gottlieb might maybe vindicated, I'm afraid to say, at some point in time. Back in 2015, 81% of Democrats and 67% of Republicans favored mandatory childhood vaccinations against infectious diseases, according to the Washington Post. In 2020, similar gap, about 80% of Democrats to about 70% of Republicans. Now, Republican support for childhood vaccinations against any infectious diseases has dropped to 46%. 46 approval, 35% disapproval. Trump voters are underwater, 40% approval to 42% disapproval. And both those numbers can go down further, you know, if they're subjected to 6 months of propaganda from Fox News about vaccinations. And for that matter, DeSantis, who I'm going to be talking a bit more about next week. Blacks and Latinos, by the way, showed about 60% support still for general vaccinations, which is not superb, but it's halfway in between, really, the Democrats and Republicans at the moment. Jim Jordan's already explicitly called for an end to all vaccine mandates. So we'll see if Gottlieb is vindicating his concerns there. I personally share those concerns. Also, YouGov, in August 2020, 59% of Republicans said parents should be required to have their children vaccinated against infectious diseases. Now it's 46%, so on the way down. And one of the problems I've got, it's not a problem. One of the issues is that the Biden administration doesn't have very effective messengers to try and combat these concerns. Well, as we know, Fauci, I have a lot of respect for Fauci as a person. He's done a lot of the good things over the last few decades, but as I've said on this podcast a few times, I think he's done. I think he's been poisoned to a large proportion of the population. He's been painted as if he's a mad scientist who kills puppies and is wildly political. I also think that he's just done so many interviews and he's just been fighting so many unfair attacks on him from people like Rand Paul and so forth for years now. I think he's just really tired and he just needs a break, and he's too old to come back after that break. And I don't think he's at his best. I think he's too defensive when he does interviews, and he's making the battle too personal. And I'm not criticizing him for that. I think almost anyone in his position would react the same way. It's natural, it's human, but it compromises him, and it compromises his effectiveness as an advocate. So he's not really much good to anyone other than the most partisan of Democrats, I feel. Walensky, who's the head of the CDC, Rochelle Walensky, she is a terrible advocate because she keeps on saying stuff that's just not true. During the edit, I was going to take the time to make a note of all the things that she said that are just flat out wrong over the last year, and the number of times she's been inconsistent and switched and gone from one one view to another view of the science within a week. So she does it a lot, flip-flopping around, saying things that are just not true. Unfortunately, I didn't make that list because I fell asleep, but which was great comfort to the editor who was trying to work with me at the time. But there's been a few. I do have one example from recently, which I'll play right now.
The evidence is clear. Masks can help prevent the spread of COVID-19 by reducing your chance of infection by more than 80%.
I do not know where she gets that number from. 80% effective masks? If masks are 80% effective to prevent the disease, we wouldn't need vaccines. 80% is much more effective than vaccines after a couple of months, like after they start to degrade a bit. Oh, not degrade, after they start to become less effective a little bit. There's no way that masks are 80% effective. That's just not true, especially different kinds of masks. She didn't say N95 masks. She didn't say surgical masks. She just said masks. What, so a piece of cloth? Like, no, they're not 80% effective. I mean, maybe she meant they block 80% of particles, surgical masks. I don't know. I don't know what she meant. All I'm saying is that what she said was wrong. And she tweeted that out. It's not that I didn't just clip that out from watching her testimony and going, oh, no, you misstated something. I'm going to jump all over you. No, that's a soundbite that she tweeted on her official account. She's proud of that. I don't know what's going on with her. But she's not an effective advocate. So it makes me concerned about where things are going with public outreach and potential repercussions. All right, that's enough of that. I want to talk about one thing quickly before we finish up, and it's appointments. This is a weird topic, but I'm going to put in the homework an article about this. But if you can't be bothered reading it, I'm going to summarize the article right now. I'll just go to this because it's an interesting area. The Senate has confirmed about as many key nominees for President Biden so far as it had for Trump. But the difference is Trump nominated way less because Trump didn't care about a lot of these nominees, which Biden does. The Senate's confirmed about 166 of them for Biden. It was about the same for Trump. But that is a bit less than half the number they had confirmed at this stage for Bush and Obama. So that's a problem. There are currently, like I said, Trump didn't bother nominating a bunch, but Biden's nominated 136 executive branch nominees that are waiting for the Senate to vote on them. They've confirmed so far in almost a year 166. There are 136 waiting to be confirmed, just sitting there, nominated, see on the shelf. Put this in context. At the end of October 2001, the queue was not 136, it was 18. In 2009, at this stage, the queue was 42. In 2017, at this stage, the queue was 108. Now, so the queue is getting longer and longer, but they've actually just recently, they passed a rule to try and make the queue shorter. What they did was in 2013, they changed the procedure. They used to have to overcome a filibuster. They made it, no more 60 vote filibusters. You only need 50 votes to confirm nominees. Okay. That's nice, but what it didn't change, and this is a bit of a subtle concept, which is what I want to explain. Even though you only need 51 votes, you still have to overcome a filibuster. A filibuster is not a 60 vote requirement in the Senate. A filibuster is a procedure you need to go through. It's when someone says, I am stopping debate going forward, and then you have to overcome it. Normally with filibusters, you overcome it with 60 votes. They changed the rule in the Senate so that you only need 51 votes to overcome filibusters for nominees. But you still need to overcome the filibuster. Even it only takes 51 votes, but you still need to overcome it. You might go, well, so what? Just take the vote. It's not that simple. You need to, when you signify interest in overcoming the filibuster, you need to go through a process, which takes a few hours. So what? 2-3 hours, whatever, that's okay. It's all right. If you want to get your nominees up, that's what you need to do. For 136 nominees, 136 nominees times 2 is 272 hours. That's, if they do this 12 hours a day, that's like nearly a month. And they're doing other things as well. Like, and that's non-stop sanding. That's busting bladders and all the rest of it. You know, so it's they're going to run out of time if they try and do this process, which is the reason why they only go through the process for the people they really, really want, and the rest they just say, oh, we'll get back to you, and then you have these queues of 136 people. So just keep an eye on that. It's not something that gets talked about a lot because it's kind of bureaucratic and boring, but the executive branch is only half staffed for this reason. So what I would propose is that they reform the process further. So either it takes zero time to beat a filibuster for these appointments, or they make bulk appointments simultaneously. Like whether you go, okay, you only do one at a time to break the filibuster. If there's a filibuster, you can combine 136 of them, or 10 of them, or whatever, and vote for them en masse. So then, yes, it's worth the 2 or 3 hours that it takes to break the filibuster, because then you get 10 appointments. That would be a way to get around it. So that I would suggest that. But in the meantime, at the moment, they're just doing nothing. That's probably not the best. That is probably enough. Like I said, not such an unleashing. We got a fair bit done in the main podcast. I didn't need to. I've got probably one more of these unleashings to go, though. I've still got some lab leak stuff and a few random things left over from the last few months. So we will see if it's going to be next week or afterwards. We might be able to squeeze everything in the main podcast because Thanksgiving. We'll see. Thank you very much for going all the way to the end of the unleashing. I will see you guys next week. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.